Okay, Mark Rogers TV on the eve of the BCS National Championship Game. Number 1, Notre Dame. Number 2, Alabama. Before we look at the big matchups, let's look at this from a historical perspective. For Alabama, vying to become the first program since Nebraska to win 3 national championships in 4 years. Of course, the Huskers did it in 94, 95, and 97, splitting the championship with Michigan in 97. For Notre Dame, trying to become an SEC giant killer for the first time since the BCS era. You have to go back to pre-BCS, Florida-Nebraska in the Fiesta Bowl, to find an SEC team that went down in this situation. That's, of course, when the Huskers completely pounded the Gators with Tommy Frazier quarterback and Lawrence Phillips 62-24 in the 96 Fiesta. Since then, it's been all SEC. Tennessee in 98 over Florida State, LSU in 03 over Oklahoma. And then, of course, this recent run started with Florida over Ohio State in 2006. Let's talk about the best matchup on the field, the best 2 units. Alabama's offensive line, Notre Dame's front 7 on defense. And it starts with this Alabama offensive line. Let's run them down for you. Get used to the names. Barrett Jones at center. He's so good that as a tackle last season, he won the Outland Award. As a center this season, he won the Remington Award. However, he was banged up in the SEC Championship game against Georgia, practiced very little during the month of December. He's practicing this week in Miami, but we'll see if he's banged up and ready to go. DJ Fluker, first-round NFL pick. He's the vocal and emotional leader for the Tide up front. Then you've got Chance Warmack, a top 10 NFL pick, and right now projecting to be the best lineman in the pros. But look out, you've got Cyrus Kuendijo, who's probably the most talented and could, if he lives up to expectations, become the best NFL player of the 5. And finally, Anthony Steen. He's the right guard, and Steen is the strongest in the weight room, which is really impressive. Less impressive is that Steen is the weakest link. He's got poor footwork, poor technique, gets pushed around at times. That's the Alabama offensive line that's so impressive that Notre Dame defensive coordinator Bob Diaco had this to say about Bama up front. He was very specific here. They're the best offensive line from tackle to tackle that we've seen. They're uniquely big and fast. They're not just another happy-go-lucky offensive line. They're angry, intense, aggressive group. They've got a quick twitch. You don't hear that much about offensive linemen being talked about. They have a quick twitch. These guys are quick. They're balanced. You don't knock them to the ground. They play hard and they finish blocks. Nick Saban, Alabama head coach, had this to say about his offensive line, and you know Saban doesn't dole out compliments very often. They communicate really well. They're intelligent. They have great confidence, and they play as one. They play as one unit. That's what makes any offensive line very successful, and this group has started 160 games up front. And we know what kind of running backs Alabama has in the backfield. This offensive line would make average running backs look good, but they've got really good ones, if not potentially great ones, in Eddie Lacy and TJ Yeldon. Of course, Lacy bruises it between the tackles, and he's got great speed. He can do both. Yeldon has the great speed and the super quickness, but he can run between the tackles, and has no issue, does the freshman, hitting linebackers. So both these guys can do it inside and outside, and they ripped up a very talented Georgia front 7 for 350 rushing yards, especially in the second half, wore down the Bulldogs. Now, Georgia's probably at least as talented as Notre Dame in the front 7, not as disciplined or as fundamentally sound. That's what makes Notre Dame so great. Yes, they've got the physical talent and the speed, but they're also just so disciplined and fundamentally sound and tenacious. And they tackle, and they're sure tacklers, starting with, of course, Manti Te'o, 103 tackles, 7 picks. And he's the Heisman runner-up, and he's Mr. Everything. He's the inspirational leader, and rightfully so. The adversity that this guy faced and the class act that he is, and he brings it week in and week out. Keep in mind that the Notre Dame rush defense gave up 2 rushing touchdowns this season. Now, SEC fans, I know that you're maybe not too impressed in looking at the schedule, but let's keep this in mind. Le'Veon Bell of Michigan State, he's going to be toting the rock in the NFL. He's really, really good. They shut him down. They contained him. Against Michigan, and Denard Robinson, who's a great rushing quarterback, one of the most prolific in history. And at that time, the Wolverines had Fitz Toussaint, a legitimate running back before he was lost later in the season. They shut them down. Also against Oklahoma and their speedy backs. Against USC and Red and McNeil, they shut them down. Pitt and Ray Graham, that's another story. We'll get to that in just a second. And also Stanford and Stephon Tuitt. They shut down Stanford, and specifically, you know what happens when these teams get to the goal line. We saw it against USC. We saw it against Stanford. Notre Dame steps up. And, of course, it's Teo, but it's also the two guys up front at the tackle spots. The nose tackle, Louis Nix III. Now, this guy had a flu bout against Pitt, and that's one of the reasons, the big reason that the Panthers, Ray Graham, ran for 172 yards against Notre Dame is because Louis Nix III had the flu. He was weakened. He had his plays compromised, wasn't on the field a whole lot, and Pitt took advantage. But when he's in the game, he is stout at 6'3", 330. You also have up front the senior, Capron Lewis Moore, who had, let me look at his stats, 8.5 tackles for loss and 6 sacks. Very productive interior lineman. And then on the outsides, going at defensive end and at linebacker, they play all over the place. Of course, probably the most talented of the bunch is Stephon Tuitt. He had 12.5 sacks and 13.5 tackles for loss. This guy is 300 pounds, and he can run like the wind. Stephon Tuitt is a big, big-time player. And then also a guy that caught my eye, starting with the Purdue game, is Prince Shembo, who recorded close to double digits, 7.5 sacks and 10.5 tackles for loss. And then you also have support from the secondary with safety Zeke Mata, one of the captains. He was second on the team in tackles, so you know he supports the run. And even the cornerbacks in Jackson and Russell, they are two of the top 5 tacklers on the defense. So they support the run as well and are short tacklers as well. And if you believe that the best players in the country grow up in the South, keep this in mind, that all the players we listed for Notre Dame's front 7, they all are from Georgia, Florida, or the Carolinas. That's the deal. Notre Dame's front 7, Alabama's offensive line. It should be an unbelievable matchup in Miami. Would love to hear what you have to say about Bama and Notre Dame. We've got more previews coming on Mark Rogers TV.